Hello, my name is Sarrah Christensen, and today I'm going to be speaking about solar returns. The title of my presentation is Every Year is New, Exploring Solar Returns, and today my volunteer is Vanessa, so thank you, Vanessa. All right, so I'll get to my slides here by sharing my screen. There we go. Okay, first of all, we want to touch on what is a solar return for those folks who aren't aware of it. Let me just move this down a little bit so I can see here. So basically, the solar return is an astrology chart that is calculated to the degree for the exact hour, minute, and second as the sun was on the day of your birth each year. And the solar return is where the sun is located near or on your actual birthday each year, and with new perspective for the coming year with all the planets in relation to the sun. It holds information about life potentials reflected in your birth chart and what areas of life are in the forefront during the coming year. So from the very basics, this is good for folks who've never had this before. Some will be familiar with this, but the signs are important, of course, as learned in the essential astrology. The signs around the zodiac are important to understanding the archetypes of human expression. I've listed them all here, Aries through Pisces. And each sign is connected to an element. And this is also very important around the basics. The foundation of astrology is fire, water, earth, and air, and also a mode, cardinal, fixed, and mutable energy. We have all the planets to consider in the chart, and sun, moon are the luminaries, and then we have Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are the personal planets, and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto is the transpersonal planets. In evolution astrology, and some modern astrologers like to also consider these others, which is Chiron, Ceres, Pallas, Athena, Juno, Lilith, and Vesta. And it depends on where they are in the solar return chart and where they are in the natal chart, how much emphasis I give to those bottom asteroids and dwarf planets. Then we also have the houses. This is where life happens in the houses. So we have first house through the 12th. Basically, from a beginner standpoint or the foundational part of astrology, first house is the I am, self, vitality, action, focus on you. Second house is our essential needs, our income, our personal resources, and also I would say values. I would put that in there. Third house is ideas, curiosity, thinking, students, siblings, your local community as well. Fourth house, home, physical, but it also could be your internal sense of security and your family. It's the parental axis, part of the parental axis, so it's probably one of your parents. Fifth house, your self-opening expression, the heart, creative, your creativity expressed in the world, children. Sixth house is work, co-workers, work challenges, health, daily habits, and also because it's 6 houses away from the first, I would also consider lack of health, illness can show up in the 6th house as well. 7th house is relationships, love, or even open enemies, business partners as well. 8th house is relationships, intimate, shared resources, death, taxes, all those wonderful things of life. 8th house is really a transformational house. 9th is long distance travel, higher education, law, God, religion. 10th houses are personal persona that's out in the public. It's our career, it's our public life, our professional life, our reputation and our identity in that capacity. 11th house is our community, our tribe, our associations, clubs, friends, objectivity. 12th house is self-undoing, selfless humanitarian types, trickster, possibly escapism, possibly time of introspection and solitude, or opening up in compassion, vision, imagination, and intuition. So we kind of take the houses in into perspective for the solar return, just as we would the natal chart. It's just a little bit of different spin. The aspects are important in what they tell us about the planets in the solar return chart, just as they do in the natal. And here is just a list of what we look at, mostly, from the conjunction, opposition, square, trine, sextile. So the first 5 are the ones I mainly use, but you can also get into semi-squares and quadrats, like we just talked about, and semi-sextile and quincunx as well. So guidelines for delineating the solar return. Now, this is on 2 slides, so bear with me here for a second. So the first thing is the solar return ascendant. Look, when we cast the chart for the solar return, we look at what is the rising sign of the solar return chart. That first house angle shows what house in the natal chart is prominent for the year. That's the first thing I will look at. Also, natal potentials are triggered into action by similarity between the return chart and the natal chart. The cusp of the astrological houses are powerful points within the chart. Note whether the house cusps of the return chart conjoin or form an aspect with the natal planets. Consider the nature, determinations, and the state of those planets and their ruling houses. Note which natal houses each planet occupies or rules, and determine what can be forecast on the basis of these natal positions and the celestial state of each of the planets in the chart. Note whether any of the planets in the return chart conjoin or aspect their own natal positions or the positions of any other birth planet. How are these planets related to each other or determined in each chart? Note the house position of each planet in the birth chart and to which house the natal planet relocates in the return chart. Also note which houses each planet rules in the natal and the return charts. And consider to which house of the return chart the planet's natal house relocates, and study how it is disposed in the return chart. Okay. Note whether the celestial state or the dignity of each planet in the natal and return charts are similar or contrary in nature, and to what extent. Similarity tends to manifest natal potentials. I think this is a really key sentence here, and we'll come back to that. Contrariety cause hindrance, stress, and friction. I would say a good word is tension. So when they're contrary to each other. Note whether a planet has the same or similar determination in the solar return as in the birth chart. A similarity of determinations is especially important for any planet involved in natal directions that will perfect in the coming year. Note whether the same house in each chart presages the same or relates matters, or whether they have contrary indications. This is similar to the step above. Note whether the current directions favor or contradict what is signified by the solar return. Note what each planet signifies in the birth chart according to its celestial state and the determinations in the nativity. In a similar way, we study the return chart and note whether the natal and return significations of each planet agree or disagree among themselves, and how these significations relate to any directions involving the planet that will perfect in the coming year. And then judge the effects of each planet in the return chart by synthesizing all these factors. Okay, that's a lot to ingest, but here we go. We're going to look at Vanessa's natal chart first, so we can get a lay of the land of understanding her natal promise in what's going on in her natal before we look at the solar return. And we're going to look at the solar return for 2017 and dive into that detail because she's recently had her birthday. So we're going to look at 2017 and then learn from Vanessa kind of what happened in that year. And then we're going to look at the chart for solar return for 18, and then we can kind of discuss that openly as a group to kind of, share what we think we see in the chart, okay, based on these rules of delineating. Okay, so when we look at Vanessa's natal chart, we can quickly see that we have the Taurus sign on the ascendant. She's got Taurus rising, so Venus is going to be an important planet, and Venus is right there in the first house, conjunct Saturn. So note that. And also looking at the Sun is opposite Neptune in her chart. And so there's a strong, not only just opposite Neptune, but also in a T-square with the Moon and Mars up there in the 10th house in the mutable signs. So this is a strong signature within Vanessa's natal chart. And so each of those, so she has a lot of planets involved. She also has a grand air trine between Jupiter in the 9th, to Uranus in Libra in the 5th house, over to her Saturn or Venus, kind of Mercury, Venus, Saturn in the 1st. So we have that combination of air for her as well. I also like to note right out of the gate, because Chiron is exactly opposite Uranus, so it's a strong opposition in her chart in the 5th and the 11th house, between in the cardinal sign of Aries and Libra. So we've got a little bit of the lay of land. We have Pluto in the 5th in Libra, and it is in a trine to her Sun, so this powerful combination there as well. Nodal axis 2nd and 8th, and North Node in the 8th, and the South in the 2nd. And that would be North Node Capricorn. So Saturn is quite important for kind of the North Node, and then the South Node is tying into that Moon, and it's actually trine. So, okay, so we got a lay of the land of understanding kind of what Vanessa's natal chart looks like. And we're going to take a look at, so kind of keep this in your mind, Taurus rising, and we're going to look at the solar return chart for 2017. So here's the solar return chart for 2017. So what is the first thing I want to take a look at? The first thing I want to take a look at is right here is the 28, Libra is the rising sign. And if we go back and forth between this one, this is her natal, we see that this rising sign is just right inside her 6th house. See that? So that is telling us that 6th house is going to be the focus for the solar return year for Vanessa. So then we look at, okay, where's the ruling planet? Well, guess what? That ruling planet is right there in the 6th house as well. So we have in the solar return, the ruler of the solar return chart and of her 6th house natally is in the 6th house of the solar return chart. So Venus is telling us some information here, something about work, and it's work, and it's possibly working with a woman, a female, could be her sister. She does have a sister. And it could be related to something that it has a Venus that has more of a Mars kind of tonality to it. A little bit more of an aggressive Venus who's going after something, or work related. So that's telling us a little bit of information about Venus, okay? Let's see what else we got here. The next one I want to take a look at is, notice that Uranus is very close to the descendant line, which is opposite the solar return ascendant. So that tells me there is the potential for some unexpected stuff, maybe in the health, but maybe it's more related to dealing with a relationship of sorts. So that's telling part of the story here from the 6th and also leaning into the 7th house here. Okay. The Mars, which rules the Venus, is in a sextile. So it's offering kind of, it's activating it and acting as kind of a support in some way. And Mars in this chart is in Gemini. And if you remember, she had a lot going on in Gemini, where the sun, but notice where her Saturn is natally, 21 degrees. So the Mars is conjunct her Saturn, her natal Saturn in the solar return. So there's kind of some work or a lot of activity, but it may be behind the scenes from the 8th house, or something that she's working on behind the scenes, but maybe it's two things that she's working on because it's in Gemini. So that's another thing I noticed in her solar return. We also have Pluto down here at the bottom of the chart. I have to move this so you can see what I'm talking about. Can you see that? So Pluto is square that Venus in the solar return. So transiting Pluto, or the solar return Pluto, is square the Venus. So to me, there's maybe some powerful lessons around, or traditional approaches to the communication style that's going on, or something like that. Or it's being transformed in some way, and she's participating in the work somehow. And also we have, on the other side, we have Jupiter at 13 degrees Libra, opposite widely of the Venus by about 5 or so degrees. So it's highly relevant here. So there's something about her place, her unconscious mind, but also what's not seen, what's going on behind the scenes, or you know, from that perspective as well. And yet there's some support from the Saturn, from the Mars to the Jupiter in the air as well. And also looking at Saturn is trine by fire energy from the Saturn and Sag to this Uranus at 26. So from her values perspective, her money, her income, there's something that may be supportive to the work. Okay? And then she's got Mercury and Moon both in the 7th house, telling me there's kind of how the thinking, the perception, and so forth with the relationships have a Taurian influence. So the Venus is part of this equation, so there's maybe a little bit of different approach to it. The Moon's in Taurus, so there's maybe a feeling energy to it, a sensitivity to it from the values perspective, but with the ruler of Taurus being in Aries, Venus is kind of stimulating that in a different kind of way. So there's that. So I'd wonder about relationships, how they feel, how does that work relationship, you know, if that's work or if that's maybe a health signature or related. We want to ask those kinds of questions. And that would be where I would start looking at the theme for the year. And of course, the rising sign is Libra, so relationships definitely are a part of the theme, but again, they fall in her 6th house. So it's maybe a concentration of what she's getting out of that 6th house relationships. Okay. What else? I also noticed in the solar return that Sun had Ceres conjunct. So I thought Ceres was going to be an important dwarf planet to consider here in her solar return, because it's so close to the Sun in a part of this, in a trine to Jupiter. So there's kind of this connection between Ceres, maybe grief, maybe you know, that relationship to the mother, and what's not being visible, seen maybe to others, but it's still going on maybe, and how that's affecting underneath. So the relationship of stuff underneath and her own space. Anyway, these are the focus, maybe because of the Libra being on the ascendant, we're looking at the balancing of opposites during the year, how she would look at that, how Vanessa would look at that, bringing beauty in, and that's a part of her truth that would be important as well. Could be even social justice. Libra tends to have a lot to do with social justice. And with Venus in Aries, I would wonder about that social justice as a theme, or maybe having to show up to be brave or to be really proactive like that, in that manner. So I think I've covered all the ones I wanted to cover. So I think my next one shows the connection from the solar return to the natal. And so here we are. You can see the overlay. And this is where I'm going to leave it while we have Vanessa share her experiences of 2017 before her birthday, which was just a couple weeks ago. And not even that long ago. It was May 25th. So, and we'll go from just the beginning of right after your birthday last year, and then move forward from there. So I'll leave it to you, Vanessa.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a year that I summarized as the year of love and death, or actually death and love. My father died early 2017, so before the 2017 solar return. Mm-hmm. And yes, there was a lot of, I often said to friends that I was journeying through the landscape of grief. But it was also the year I got married. 9 months after my father died, I got married. And so there was this whole, in the midst of grief, planning a wedding. Mm-hmm. And I did work briefly as sort of a side gig to a woman who is a social activist and does a lot of work I was working behind the scenes mm-hmm. in supporting her doing all this social work stuff, activism. She has a huge following. So I got to witness what happens behind the scenes. And it taught me a lot, and things like that. But I guess I would say it was a very internal year, actually. In terms of health, as you were saying about health, I was like, oh, did I have anything in health per se? I didn't really, thankfully, have anything. Mm-hmm. But I had a lot of muscle pain. And it turned out it was a lot to do with the way my desk was set up, so I was having problems with that. But mm-hmm. I learned too they had to do with grief. The mm-hmm. pain would come mm-hmm. on the shoulders and the arms and sort of the back. Mm-hmm. And so that was much later. And the other thing, thinking of Jupiter in the 12th house in the solar return chart in series, around the solar eclipse last year, I had this sort of waking up in the middle of the night and having insight, a download of a fiction novel, and I started writing that. Mm-hmm. Which is about journeying through the landscape of grief.
Yeah, I remember you writing and sharing it online. I remember that now. You're going for the word count.
I did manage that now. And now I'm kind of ready to go back to that. And the other thing is, because my birthday just happened, I did have my mother visiting, for 4 months, which was in and of itself a whole other story. But so there was the mother as well involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Didn't you mention that when your mother came to visit, you had to take your office space and make it her space?
Yes.
So you lost a lot of your space for personal escape, and that moon in Pisces getting away to do that. So you're getting back to that now.
Actually, funny enough, I reclaimed the office today. I'm recovering from a cold, and so I finally was like, okay, I am bringing back the furniture and the computer and everything else. So It was full on, first time back in the office.
Yeah.
And I felt that. I really felt that. That was challenging, really. I didn't think it was going to be, but it felt very challenging not to have my space. And the other element too, to bring in that Libra rising, I did a lot of art last year. I thought that after my father's death, I wasn't going to be inspired, but no, it was the opposite. I was very inspired, actually more ideas than I could know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. It's easier to see the nodal, the nodes where they were at the solar return. Those nodes are the eclipse. And so the fact that you got that download for that writing is like right there. And Aquarius South Node, North Node on the in Leo at the nadir there. It's powerful. And in the air sign, you're definitely got that air to bring it in.
I got to go back to it because afterwards, after I hit the word count, I felt like, oh, I've hit that wall. But it was very cathartic to write because it actually coincided with the moment I felt the hardest traveling through grief. Mm-hmm. I think after I got married and everything was sort of, okay, did that, I crashed. Mm-hmm. And it was writing that was very helpful. Mm-hmm. The word count was like, yeah, keep me going.
Yeah, which is interesting because it kind of makes me think about the writing piece would be the Mercury, but I also think the Venus in Aries, the action to go and do it. I'm going to grab this and run with it kind of thing. Yeah.
I highly recommend this thing that it's called NaNoWriMo. Recommend it thoroughly. It's very helpful.
The other thing that you mentioned, and it made me think of the sister, because the moon was in the solar return 7th, and your 3rd house is ruled by the moon, right? Cancer is your 3rd house. So that she was a kind of important part here as well after your father passed. And can you share that part?
Yeah, she we have a huge age difference, and she's my half sister, but she actually took over his business, and in her own way had to, she's a Capricorn, so as you know, she had to really step it up with it. She's going through Saturn return, the whole bit.
Yeah.
But she took over the business, but she doesn't want to do it. So she's really, in this last year and still to this year, she's really looking to what is my career? What do I want to do? She's really looking to change her job and
full on Saturn return.
Full on, all of it.
Especially with all that Capricorn for those.
Yeah.
Before we go into 2018, I want to open it up. If anyone has any questions on solar return or what they see or how to look at this chart versus, say, the solar return itself. Does anyone, I want to open that up just to see if anyone has any questions or sharing. If not, we can always go on too. No? Okay. I guess we'll go on to 2018. So thank you, Vanessa, for sharing what happened in 2017. And
you're welcome.
We just had the birthday, so we're marching forward. So here's the solar return chart for 2018. So looking at this, the first thing we notice is Capricorn is right on the ascendant of the solar return chart. And we can see that Saturn, the ruler of the Capricorn, is right there. And it's in retrograde, so it's going to actually come back and hit the ascendant again. So she has a very strong Saturn in this solar return chart for 2018. So I definitely think that being in the 1st house, the identity is asking for that, putting something into form, and it's going to be some work. So there's work attributed here, and a major year as it relates to that. So putting more form around identity, herself in the world, lots of hard work. It could be working with someone else because of the relationship that Saturn has opposite to the Venus. as we can see here. And that could be tension with a female person at work, or the sister she's having to work with, or maybe she takes on work relationships with other women, and there's a tension between her own authority and that relationship. That's a possibility, right? Because the Venus is in Cancer, it makes me wonder if it's not the sister and what's going on with the sister in life. That's a possibility here, because the third house of Vanessa's natal chart is Cancer. So the moon rules the Venus, Saturn in the first, as well as Pluto in the first. There's a lot of transformational energy being invited, not just invited, probably demanded here. And the moon is involved in a square, cardinal energy. So it's really strong. The moon in Libra wants balance and harmony and everything to work out, but it is in the 9th house. So it has that kind of, wants to operate like that. And so there'll be probably a balancing of where she wants to be from her personal work projects versus other work projects. And I know that she has a partnership with her husband, and there's a balancing of that as well as she participates in that. What's lovely about this solar return, though, is she has Venus and Jupiter in a trine, and also trining Neptune. Neptune and Jupiter are actually in a tighter trine. So there's kind of like a grand water going on here, trine. But the Jupiter and Neptune, Jupiter in the 10th house is quite strong, and it's the highest planet elevated in the solar return chart. So Jupiter, Scorpio, diving deep, and it could be bringing up information to the public in some way by what she's doing, whatever she's giving form to. It could be around the topic of grief. It could be this book that she's been writing. It could be in other things that she does with astrology. Tends to show up in Scorpio a lot, bringing things to the surface for others, part of the public life. And the Neptune ties in kind of the imagination. The value of art is part of Vanessa's passion and who she is. And so that to me is also showing kind of this wonderful way of sharing herself through the water element here. What else? The Saturn is also conjunct her north node, her natal north node. I got that correct? Yes. So the Saturn is even more important because it sits, I can probably see it better on this chart. I'm going to go back to their chart, but you can see the Saturn sits with the ascendant of the solar return right on her nodal axis. This is a really, really important year for her in transformation. How she comes into her own authority, how she looks at that really close relationship and how that works together as well. But also, I'm going to go back, oops, that way, sorry. Part of this also is looking at the Mars and the South Node in Aquarius, and that is in trine to her Sun. So there's something that when she takes action on it, maybe bringing something up from the past, or possibly even people from the past coming up, resurfacing for something for her to look at, because it's kind of past focus, and yet it's got a tie to the Sun, and it's got a tie to the Moon here in a supportive flow. So there's something that can come together there. Also, what was the last thing I wanted to share here? Oh, I have to go to this one to see it. You can see Venus is sitting on her natal south node as well. And it's actually pretty tight with Vesta. So there's the value of being alone here. Keeping the fires burning on what she values is a part of this. And there's the connection to the nurturing, the self-nurturing, the values there, and where she feels secure. So this is really the important part right here, is the solar return. So, and then we have Uranus is in Taurus, but it's entered her 12th house. So this, to me, solar return, Uranus in Taurus, is going to be shaking things up from the unconscious, bringing that maybe to surface for something for her to work with. And Mercury's in Taurus as well, but closer to her actual natal ascendant, 6 degrees away. So not quite like where I would say it was peaking in within 3 degrees of the first house, but close. So there's an undercurrent of perception that she has access to in her body as well. So she'll have to be mindful of that from her self-care as well. And, the transiting Neptune, of the solar return Neptune in the 10th house, excuse me, is that the 10th? Yeah, that's the 10th of her natal. It does have influence over her Mars and her moon. And so to me, this is body awareness and her energy awareness. She has to be very careful around how much she gives out without having a place to receive as well. So that will be something, of course, she'll have to navigate and pay attention to and be aware of. But it is a prime location for art and imagination coming through that she may share very publicly. Any questions so far on the solar return for 2018? Any other things that folks are seeing here? Okay. So these, basically in the solar return, we could speak to Vanessa about the coming year and about the work that she would probably be taking on, and that because of the importance of it being so close to the ascendant, it would have it would be a year that would remind her that it would be a year of hard work. And it could be a year of feeling restricted in some places because there's so much work to do, and how that would make her feel. So that would be something that would be discussed in the solar return discussion. But also that there's the opportunity for art, some stimulation of the unconscious mind will bring up new ideas and so forth, but it's also being careful of what's coming up and dealing with it if it needs to be healed in some capacity. And what's coming up from the past that can be revisited to write about it or present it and share it from the astrological community, or other things that she ties in with her work. So I hope you have enjoyed this and have gotten something out of it. One last one I wanted to point out is Jupiter. Jupiter in 16 degrees of Scorpio is square the nodes of the solar return by fixed sign. And so it's kind of a call for being recognized for success in her work. So anyway, I wanted to leave you with that. It doesn't sound like anyone has any questions unless you have them now.
I do have one, and you may have already addressed this, and I sort of flew by me. The Venus in the solar return conjunct the South Node.
here. Yeah, solar return, Venus conjunct the natal south node, yes?
Yeah. Is this bringing up old familial relationships or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's family relationships, familiar.
Yeah, it's a tongue twister.
But it also could be, you know, because it's south node, it can have some pain points in there to be addressed as there's the connection, and then it could be the connection with the sister and the father's passing. That's eighth house. So Saturn sitting in the eighth house, right? And so her working with her sister on dealing with some of that transition of the grief or the family business, and she's the sounding board for her sister for making that from that perspective. But it could be also that it may bring up memories and things like that she values and how she feels about him, and it may, be part of, and dealing with waves of grief in some sort. But it's also can be what she values. It's a reminder of what she values and what she puts in, because it's Venus in Cancer. Make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, that just caught my eye with the nodes being activated there.
Yeah, because of that activation, it is a super powerful year in that regard. And because it's first house where the Saturn is in the solar return, it is something that's really embarking on the identity for Vanessa that kind of comes into some of her own personal authority beyond, but also how she may show up to her sister, how she may show up to other women when she's, presenting herself, the work she's done, the art she's doing and does and has done. I mean, it kind of comes online, and so, but there'll be more work to go with it. And there's also work with the spouse as well. So that's part of the dynamic. And yet it's sitting on the node, so it's part of the nodal story, evolving.
Yeah, and it seems like it's kind of repeated because the moon is square the nodes in the solar return as well, and the moon, of course, is square the Venus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And to see that the moon is sitting in her creative.
Right. Yeah.
And it does have, it's part of the story again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe actually bringing that out. What is that? But manifesting it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In the home. Like she said, she reclaimed her room.
Yeah. And but there's also that beautiful water trine in the chart, as well, right? So Jupiter here, Venus, in the second house here, and then it was up here with the Neptune. Even though Venus is a little bit far, but it's definitely Jupiter and Neptune having really lots of water going on in the flow, and easy flow to access it. So yeah,
definitely.
Mm-hmm. So the art will be amazing, I'm sure. And probably lots of stimulus of coming from the 12th house, the unconscious, available to her. So does that make sense?
Definitely. Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to say thank you. I do have a question. What would you say about that Venus in the return opposite Saturn?
Yeah, it can be the power struggle,
mm-hmm.
an authority figure, and the feminine. The feminine in the emotional place, but also the emotional body. But this is in the value section. So it could be an argument with money and someone else's money, or being controlled by someone else's money and not. That's a possibility, but it doesn't always have to play out that way. Some people would say 8th house is inheritance, but I don't know if that's already been addressed.
Yeah, that's been addressed. No, it's just interesting. So I guess the other question I have is, if you will, how much time do you spend between looking at the solar return chart over the natal return as it is now, or as the solar return chart just by itself?
I look at this first to get what's going to be the focus. And the Saturn and that first, the ascendant of the Capricorn, 8 degrees, that's the ticket.
Yeah.
That's where I look at where the hot spot really, really is. And then everything else that falls into play after that, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I always focus on what's going on in the rising sign. And that becomes, and just by looking at the nature of it, we can already see that the nature of this one is greatly significant compared to last year, even more so, for the evolvement of your North Node.
Yeah. This feels like a very North Node oriented chart. Yeah.
Very North Node. And for your South Node in Cancer, this is pushing you, because it's first house of the solar return. Its identity is going to be pushed to do this. And so it may feel uncomfortable. More than likely. It's going to be tented. And so the Venus part of, the beauty and the softness in the that's going to feel the tension. So there may be reminders or memory possibly emerge around issues around that South Node. Yeah. And Venus will, it will be, but the Venus also has support from other water elements here. So I would say that Jupiter is helping out, so there's a flow when you can get there and find the space, but it may take the frame of work first, then I can find my space, or it's like a negotiation of the balance to do that, because it's sitting right on the self and other axis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just to, because we just discussed 2017, I did leave the side gig I was doing to focus on my business and my partnership with my husband.
Right.
And so there is work to be done.
Yeah. Because it's your own business together, right? So so you have your own stuff, but you also have this shared partnership. Yeah.
Shared partnership. So I feel like I'm already learning a lot about 8th house stuff. From the way you set up a business and taxes and all that. Yeah. But also the shared resources.
Yeah. And also probably shared values, or what his values are versus yours in business. I mean, that definitely comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thankfully we get along really well, but I can see I hold the space for the more esoteric knowledge of things. So that can be sometimes an interesting conversation. And that Neptune up there, close to my Mars, let's just say I had to learn the art of napping. Because it does require this sort of oh my God, I just can't, I'm going. Then I just hit that wall and I can't go any further.
Yeah. And if you have a good partner who understands you, you can work it into the schedule.
He tends to tell me I should do the adulting thing and not nap, but some days that just doesn't happen. I have to nap.
Yeah, to keep going. Yeah, nap is required.
Even if it's a 20-minute power nap.
Yes. Yeah. Now this will be interesting year for you. Absolutely. A lot going on.
Yeah, whatever I don't know about my North Node, I think this is the year I'll be learning about it.
Yeah. I mean, and you can always look back on other solar returns and see when Saturn may have been on that before, because you may have had that. You can also revisit when you had nodal returns, because that would kind of give you some idea around it too. that'll give you some, but you're going to have a lot of new things too. So,
yeah. No, this was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, especially since the birthday is still fresh.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is very helpful.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for letting me share your detail for being a volunteer.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have, everyone. Anyone else have any questions?
Not a question, Sarah, but I want to say how clear your teaching is and how I will be returning to this to learn much more from. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I do get the request for solar returns from my clients. It tends to be like, what's going to happen this year? And of course, we use transits, but I find that the solar return can give me focus on some things. We always look at the major transits, of course, and I also value secondary progressions and solar acts, but there's always a dirty list, right? But the solar return does offer a nice perspective for the year ahead. Not every astrologer uses it. Some tend to only use secondary progressions, but I find it useful. There is one point I do want to make before we close. There is the kind of, what location do you use? This is one that comes up a lot for the solar return. Some argue for the birthplace location, and some argue for the location where they now live. And because Vanessa lives so far from where she was born, I used her relocated location. So I find that it's useful to explore both to see what kind of works for it, because every astrologer should do that. At present, I do the relocated one, even though some are adamant about using only the birth location. But I'll explore both. I'm open to that. And if you got the extra time. So I just wanted to point that out because that's a big one with the solar returns. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for the time today. I appreciate it. Thank you for letting me share solar returns with you and exploring it with Vanessa's 2017 and what she might be looking at in 2018. And you can find me at my website, onesagesview.com, and at Instagram at onesagesview. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. What a great presentation. And thank you very much, Vanessa. We'll see you next time, Sarah. Would you all please thank Sarrah Christensen, everyone?
Thank you, Sarah.
Aaron, thank you, Vanessa.
Sarah, that was brilliant. Thank you.